Hello and welcome to the second video installment of the training. I am Day. I'm the 110 Deadpool Corp flight trainer. This week we're going to cover velocity and trajectory as well as the skid attacks and the legacy rolls. So let's go ahead and get started. Um, let's go and talk about velocity and trajectory real quick. Velocity and trajectory is your speed and your direction of travel. That's basically what the TVI shows, except you have to kind of look at your TVI. Your TVI will show the direction your ship is traveling. It doesn't necessarily show the speed. So your velocity is your speed, and your trajectory is your path of flight. So in a battle, in a dogfighting situation, you always want to constantly be manipulating these two values to avoid fire. And that's why we get to the maneuvers to help you avoid them. So the first thing let's go ahead and look into is the skid attack. Now the skid attack is the one maneuver you will probably use the most. The skid attack is basically means where your ship is moving in one direction, but the nose of your ship is pointing in another. So if this rock right here were my target and I wanted to use a skid attack, I'm going to be strafing to the right and I'm going to have my nose just pointing into their direction to fire so I can hit them. You can strafe in either direction. It can be an upward strafe, a downward strafe, left strafe, or a right strafe. Just as long as your ship is moving in a different path of direction, different trajectory, and your nose will be pointing in another direction. Um, this maneuver is used to avoid collisions with other targets. A lot of players they'll try to ram you. They'll just fly straight towards you and kind of joust with you or knife fight you or whatever. You want to avoid that because unless you intentionally want to ram them, I mean, by all means head in their flight path. But this keeps that from happening. This keeps you from having collisions into your enemy. So it's very important to keep that in mind. If you do have a collision in front of your enemy and they're flying into you and you flew into them and you didn't really want to, that's your fault. You should have been able to avoid that. Um, if they're trying to intentionally ram you and they're trying to fly into your flight path, add a little bit of roll, change your trajectory, change that flight path a little bit, and that'll really mix things up to throw off their aim as well as keep them from being able to pinpoint where you're going to be at that exact point. Um, it's going to be really hard for them to ram you. So that's the skid attack. Let's go ahead and look at our legacy rolls. The legacy roll is a maneuver that is both offensive and defensive. This maneuver allows you to be able to fire at your target as well as perform basically a spiral. And we covered the spirals or the barrel rolls last week. This maneuver is, remember with the barrel rolls, we used a pitch and yaw as well as a aileron roll, which is, just spinning your ship. Instead of the pitch and yaw in this maneuver, you're actually going to use your strafe and your aileron roll. So to begin, we'll go ahead and find a rock and we'll set our aim sights on it. And I'm going to strafe up. I'm actually going to start my roll first and then I will strafe up. As you can kind of see that it does, my TVI did kind of throw that aim off a little bit. But let's go ahead and try another one. And we're going to roll and strafe, and as you can kind of see, the TVI does stay mainly on the target. That maneuver I generally don't use for a lengthy amount of time. I only use for a few seconds to avoid some fire. As well with any of the maneuvers, it's dependent on the situation. So you may use a barrel roll for 15 or 20 seconds, but then you might turn around and use a lead roll for 2 or 3 seconds. It's just really dependent on the situation. But as you can kind of see, it uses the same concept as a skid attack. This roll does. Your nose is pointing in another direction while your ship is actually moving in a completely opposite direction. My ship is moving in a spiral, but my nose is staying centered. And that's why we covered the skid attacks first, so you can kind of visualize that concept in your mind. But that's basically what's happening. It's offensive, it's defensive, it's a great maneuver. You can also perform this maneuver backwards, as we discussed. I want you guys to be able to do these maneuvers backwards and forwards and feel comfortable with it. Always keep in mind your backup camera. Uh, Pesky rocks do jump out of nowhere sometimes, and it can be a real hassle to have to deal with. So roll, pitch, fire. That is the legacy zoom. When you do it backwards, that's referred to as a legacy zoom. Also, you can flying backwards and using a skid attack. That is called an arcing zoom. That was coined by the legacy team. A lot of these terms are actually coined by the legacy team. The skid attack is an actual avionic term, but the legacies are coined by the legacy instructional series of videos. And basically an arcing zoom is flying backwards and strafing in another direction. I'm strafing off to the right, but TVI shows in the opposite direction on these. Use your backup camera. See, I'm coming close to the edge. Go ahead and boost forward, and whenever you boost forward, that's called a boom. A lot of people call them boom and zooms. The point of that is, you know, you don't want to be flat in your movements. You don't want to be easily read by your enemies. So you want to change things up as much as possible. And that is the legacy roll. Pretty easy, right? It's not that hard. Well, practice it, get used to it. Build that muscle memory so you're comfortable with it. And you're comfortable with it enough to use it throughout these asteroids and fly through asteroids using a lot of these maneuvers in tight spaces and under heavy fire and under heavy stress. So it's good to start now, learn now, and build it up later so you're an ace pilot whenever the game comes out. The next thing I want to talk about is, how to keep your velocity while changing your trajectory. To change your trajectory, you want to keep your velocity as high as possible. Number one rule in dogfights: you always want to use your speed. Using your space brake, never a good idea. I know some people I've talked to are all about, yeah, well, I can use a space brake and take tighter turns. Yes, you can, but you slow your ship to nothing, and you become a sitting duck for anybody to hit you, especially if you don't know if somebody's already got their sights on you and they're looking to find an easy score. So I don't agree with stopping your speed at all. I know some of the dual joystick users. Sorry about that. I know some of the dual joystick users, they don't actually use their thrusters. I do use my thrusters. I am using mouse and keyboard, so it's a little bit different for me. But with the dual joystick users, you guys generally use your straightforward, which is awesome and makes these maneuvers a lot easier. But changing your trajectory while keeping your velocity. So if I'm flying directly towards this rock, my velocity and my trajectory are forward. Let's say I want to take a 90-degree turn to the left. So I'm strafing, and I started strafing to the right. So my strafe is actually heading still towards the rock until my velocity can slowly acquit to the front of my ship to gain full velocity, full momentum where my nose is pointing. So I'm still keeping my speed up. It did drop a little bit, but keep in mind my velocity is still moving in that direction. I'm taking more of a diagonal path in a straight path, and I'm slowly changing my my trajectory. That's really what you want to do. You don't ever want to have your ship slow down a whole lot. You want to keep your speed up as much as possible, and that's really important. If you want to take a tighter turn while keeping your velocity, banking into your turns does help you turn faster. So if I wanted to turn left, if I'm flying straight and I wanted to make a left-hand turn, I'll roll, strafe, and I'll boost a little bit, and that'll help with the turn. It'll also help you take some of the G's off your pilot, so you're not taking so many G's. That stuff does add up. If you take a little bit of G's here and a little G's there, and you're doing a lot of twists and turns, eventually you're going to black out or have a red out, and then you're a sitting duck, and generally in a dogfighting situation, you're not gonna last too long. So that's really what I want you guys to do on your turns is just keep in mind the trajectory and the velocity you're moving in before you make your turn, so you can try and strafe to keep that velocity going, but changing your trajectory as well to you know so you're not having uh, big gap from the time your ship slows down to the time it speeds up. Another thing that you want to do is the turnarounds. One thing I do is if I got somebody behind me and I can see them behind me and they're on my tail and I know I need to turn around to face them, actually hit the wrong button there. If they're behind me and I see them, I want to decouple, turn my ship around. So my velocity is still moving. I do become flat for that little bit of period of time. Uncouple and then just strafe back. You see my velocity, my speed didn't change. And at that point I can strafe, I can move, I can do different things while keeping them in front. And then if I'm getting kind of close to a rock or something, or I want to change it up to kind of throw them off, I can go ahead and go full speed and boost, hit the afterburner and boom back in. I don't know if we covered this in the last video, but the pips, the line between the center reticle of your ship and the pip where it's telling you to lead with, that line, think of that as time. The longer that line is, the more time it's going to take for that projectile to hit. The closer it is to your center reticle, the less time for that projectile to hit. So when you boom in like that, it really shrinks that. It does mess with that pip on his ship a little bit, the enemy ship, and it can throw off their aim a little bit and add a little bit of roll and a little bit of strafe, and you're golden. You just change your direction of flight path. You're really mixing it up for him, so it's hard for him to read you and what you're gonna do and where you're going and what you're gonna be doing next. It's what really makes good pilots. Whenever you can practice a lot of these maneuvers, a lot of these very basic maneuvers, because I guarantee a lot of people are still struggling with this and they don't understand how you're able to do it. But nice and smooth movements, try to make them as smooth as possible. And it really makes a huge difference because it's really hard to read. Now, flying through asteroids, so you're not hitting asteroids, that takes practice. The one advice I can give you is take a measure of your surroundings. Look at your surroundings. Take a mental picture. Try to remember where some of these asteroids are. With enough practice, it'll become second nature. It's like I know some of you guys have licenses to drive a vehicle, but some of you may not. Well, in driver's ed or vehicle education training, they teach you to measure up your surroundings and to look ahead. Look out for objects and kind of take a mental picture of what's around you. Same thing in this, knowing if you got a big rock behind you that you just passed, is just as important as knowing, hey, there's a big rock in front of me. Using your backup camera to visualize what's behind you can open up some new possibilities and different maneuvers you can take in a dogfighting course. So say, oh, well, there's a bunch of rocks behind me, but let me get around this rock, and oh, that's clear, so I can fly backwards from here. And you can really change up your maneuvers and your pattern, and it makes it a lot harder for people to read. Practice flying through the asteroid fields. If you're not comfortable flying around asteroid fields, jump in the Arena Commander and jump in the simulator and do free flight mode in different ships. Don't just fly on the same ship. You need to fly in different ships because you need to get the feel for each and every single ship in your arsenal. That's very important because it could come in handy later on down the line. And continue practicing that. Practice flying through the asteroids. Practice taking tight turns. Practice going through the asteroids. Like right here, there's a little hole right here. Practice going through them. Use your strafing to adjust your position so you can still get tight enough. I hit that one, but you can still get tight enough around the asteroids, um, and get through them, and also judge corners and things like that. Tells you I don't fly this ship enough. I need to probably spend a little bit more time flying it. This ship is actually not in my arsenal. It's a loaner for the week. So that's pretty much it for the video, guys. I appreciate you stopping by to watch and practice a lot of this stuff. Practice makes perfect. I do spend a lot of time just in free flight, just flying around stuff and honing up my skills and my maneuvers and using a little bit of imagination to kind of where a target might be and how I might need to be around it and how I want to be to maneuver around it and stuff like that. Makes a big difference. It really does. So practice makes perfect. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next week.